When I began considering writing my book, they told me not to write another Israel book because no one will read it. But when they told me that I have an event on November 4th in Newton, I said, obviously no one will come. So the fact that all of you are here, as the results from Kentucky are in, but the results from Massachusetts are not yet in, is quite astounding. And I'm deeply grateful for each and every one of you for being here. I was in Newton several months ago, nearly 6 months ago, and a lot has happened since. So I'll be discussing soon what has happened in my country. But in the time since then, I had the privilege of traveling in your country and seeing some great American Jewish communities. And I'm deeply moved by this experience. So the fact that you are here, that you have these great institutions here, is for me almost as miraculous as Israel is. And the fact that we are all here to talk, to listen, to think about our people, about our nation there, and about our life here. I think this is of great importance. And I am deeply humbled to have a role in trying to promote and advance a new kind of conversation and discussion regarding all that we must address in the coming years. This summer was a traumatic summer for all of us. The frontier democracy Israel was confronted by Hamas, and the great American democracy was confronted by ISIS. We Jews, the Jewish people, were confronted again by some old hates that we thought are gone. So let me speak first about the Israeli traumas of this summer. Early July, as I realized what was about to happen, I went into the small room of my two sons, my 10-year-old Michael and my 5-year-old Daniel. And I told them that in the coming days, they will hear a sound they have never heard before. The sound of howling sirens. Michael was born in 2004, just as the second Intifada subsided, as suicide bombing stopped. Daniel was born 5 years later, when Israel was deep into its calm decade. The last decade did not bring about peace, but it was relatively a peaceful decade. We had some violence and violent events on our borders, but definitely in central Israel, life was as good as ever. Less Israelis and less Palestinians got killed in these years than in previous decades. And many Israelis bought into this illusion that we do not really live in the Middle East, that we live in a kind of Southern California that disconnected itself from the region and is floating in the Mediterranean, passing Corsica on its way to southern France. So Michael and Daniel grew up as American boys and girls grow up. They basically wear the same clothes, they hear the same music, they disappear in the same iPads. In our nice home, in our suburban neighborhood, they live a sheltered life that resembles the life of privileged children in any other democracy, including yours. But I realized that this is going to change. So I tried to warn them, to prepare them, so they will not be in shock. But they are young, and when the sounds of sirens did appear, it's a terrifying sound. And we walked down the stairs to the basement of our home, to the sheltered room. Michael asked if a missile might hit our house and destroy it. And Danielle asked if Iron Dome might be broken. So as I looked at them, my beloved boys, going through the experience they were going through, I thought of some similar experiences I had in previous years. In 1967, I was 9 years old. Israel was not yet occupying the West Bank and Gaza. There were no settlements and no checkpoints. And yet, the Arab nations closed in on us. They seemed to be mighty at that time. And as the Arab armies were all around us, surrounding us, there was deep fear in Israel. So we turned to the world to save us. But our greatest ally, France, betrayed us at the moment of truth. And the UN that was supposed to defend us vanished. And even the great friend that we had in the White House could not help us. So there was growing deep fear in that Israel that I remember so clearly. 22 years after Auschwitz, there was a real fear that a new Auschwitz kind of event might occur. Mass graves were dug, and there was a kind of silent sense of panic. So when the sirens howled on the morning of June 5th, 1967, I was in elementary school, and I remember us rushing into the orange groves surrounding the school, expecting the worst. As we know, that war ended with a surprising, spectacular Israeli victory. But 6 years later, the sirens howled again. And this time it was exactly the opposite. This time it was a self-confident, arrogant Israel that was surprised, that was taken by surprise by Egypt and Syria. And the F-4 bombers that flew over our rooftops on the way to the Suez Canal, many of them did not return. If it weren't for the great assistance we got from America, that by that time became our real ally, who knows how that war would have ended. 18 years later, sirens again. 1991, Saddam Hussein sent his Scud missiles to attack us. There is concern that some of them may carry chemical warheads. And I'll never forget the moment, by that time I was a young man married in Jerusalem, young journalist, when I went down the stairs to take care of our elderly neighbors. They were Holocaust survivors who immigrated to Miami and then decided to make Aliyah. So as I put the gas masks on their faces while they were shivering, I thought about the fate of our people. How is it that these people that went through the worst, that literally came from hell, have to experience such fear again? But now it was the summer of 2014. The skies were blue, hedonistic Tel Aviv, all the good life that we have in Israel. And yet, my boys were going through the transformation in front of my eyes. They were joining this sad Israeli ritual of confronting something that children in other democracies do not have to confront. What was this all about? What has happened this summer? This was Israel's fourth asymmetric warfare. Some years ago, as our enemies realized that they cannot defeat us in the battlefield, they developed a new concept of warfare. They realized that Israel's soft spot, was its civilian population. So what they do is attack our civilian population while hiding behind their own civilian population, putting us in a dilemma where if we use all our might, we'll find ourselves committing atrocities that will bring a total delegitimization of Israel and will drag us to The Hague. This is the simple but sophisticated concept that was developed. So we saw it for the first time in 2006 with the Second Lebanon War, and then in 2008, in 2012 in Gaza, and this was the fourth round. 4 such rounds of violence in such a short time, that's troubling. But what was more troubling is what we saw this time that was different than in the past. One, it was a long campaign. 50 days is a long time. 2, Tel Aviv was attacked this time. Now, the blood of the Tel Aviv people is not thicker than the blood of the people of Sderot, or Nachal Oz, or Ashkelon. I have more respect for the people living at the frontier. But symbolically and strategically, there's a great importance to the fact that Tel Aviv was attacked day after day. Just imagine an Al-Qaeda group taking over Guantanamo and firing rockets at New York day after day for an entire summer. Even if people are not getting killed, that has major implication. And imagine what America would have done in such a situation, even while being led by a peace-loving president. So this is what has happened to Israel this summer, and that has major significance. The third element of what made this one unique was this wave of anti-Semitism that we've seen mainly in Europe. 70 summers after the last summer of Auschwitz, many of the nations that have sent their Jews to Auschwitz have lost shame. What we've heard in Germany this summer was unheard of since 1945. So you saw how this combination of Middle East violence with a deep relationship with the Jews creates a disturbing new reality. How did Israel do during this war? Israel was wonderful on the defense. First of all, our leadership, led by Prime Minister Netanyahu. I'm not a great fan of Prime Minister Netanyahu. I never voted for him, and I never considered voting for him. But it must be said that he proved to be restrained, responsible, and mature in handling this conflict. There was nothing of a trigger-happy leader in him, no Rambo attitude. He was not an Israeli macho or an American kind of cowboy. On the contrary. So the Israeli policy was very responsible, and the Israeli government should get credit for that. They really tried their best to prevent war and to prevent the escalation of war. In my mind, they did not do enough to promote peace before, but as things deteriorated, they really tried to limit the scale of violence. But the real heroes of the summer in Israel were other heroes. First, it is the engineers who produced Iron Dome. A lot was said about Iron Dome, but much more has to be said. Much more. Because if it weren't for Iron Dome, we would have seen horrific events this summer. I really think that the engineers of Iron Dome should get the Nobel Peace Prize. Because if it weren't for Iron Dome, dozens and hundreds of Israeli civilians would have been killed. If it weren't for Iron Dome, Israel would have had to conquer the Gaza Strip. If it weren't for Iron Dome, hundreds of young Israeli soldiers would have been killed while conquering the Gaza Strip. If it weren't for Iron Dome, thousands and thousands and thousands of Palestinian civilians would have been killed while Israel would have conquered the Gaza Strip. The peace agreements with Egypt and Jordan would have collapsed because the pressure of the Tahrir squares would have been such that even friendly neighboring tyrants could have not kept their relationship with Israel. In Europe, we would have seen a terrible tide of anti-Semitism, much worse than what we saw, and we would have seen some anti-Semitic phenomena, even in Boston. All this was prevented by Iron Dome. So in my mind, this is not only a technological system. This is really Israel at its best. The Israeli genius there is something to be proud of and admired. But it's not only Israeli genius. It's American support. I sometimes think that sometimes the Obama administration made some mistakes in its foreign policy. But the Obama administration must get all the credit for financing in such a generous and wise way the Iron Dome system. I know Congress is not very popular in this country, especially today. But Congress should get all the credit for giving Israel that support, even while the war was raging. So what you see in Iron Dome is really an icon of how the Israeli-American alliance should be working. This is how democracies should be working together, using the advantages, the power they have as free market societies, as high-tech democracies, to defend their values and the way of life. While we see so much of dysfunctional relationship regarding other matters, which we'll discuss, this is really an icon of how we should be running our affairs together. But the other hero of the summer were Israelis, Israeli civilians, Israeli society. I wrote in my book in so many words that Israeli society is the eighth wonder of the world. We don't have much of a political system and political leadership in Israel. Our politics is even worse than yours, which is difficult. And yet, Israelis, Israeli individuals, and Israeli society are so inspiring in so many ways. The innovation, the creativity, the resilience, the energy, the vitality, the vibrancy. During the summer, this was all tested. And we did see some ugly, disturbing phenomena in Israel, which we have to address. The burning of the Palestinian boy is something that any Jew should take responsibility for and think seriously about. And we saw some other disturbing phenomena in Israel. And yet, by and large, Israeli society proved so united and resilient in a kind of quiet, impressive way. And that is reason for some hope and some pride. But our enemies had some success as well. I think we should all remember that Hamas is not only Israel's enemy. It's a fascist organization oppressing gays, oppressing women, oppressing Christians, oppressing individuals. I ask my liberal friends, both in Israel and America, and I suspect there are some liberals in this crowd, not to be tolerant to fascist organizations, even if they happen to be Palestinian ones. Hamas and other such organizations in the region represents true evil. But we have to be candid and see that this organization had some remarkable achievements during this campaign. The ability to fire rockets at Israel for 50 days with the best air force in the world above your head, that's quite something. Hamas was also very clever in developing this concept of the tunnels, which are much more than what is talked about. Because what Hamas said is, we want to be the Viet Cong. But we look around us and we see no jungle in Gaza. So they dug up an underworld jungle that actually stopped Israel's ability to exercise its superiority, technological superiority, military superiority. So what was so troubling here, and this is a bit resembles the ISIS phenomenon, that you see extremists, fanatical people, being effective to a degree in the battlefield. We had loonies in the Middle East always, but the combination of extremism, fanaticism, with sophistication, planning, and an ability to carry out warfare is a troubling phenomena that we saw this summer. So what is the outcome of this traumatic summer? We don't yet know. We hope that long term, the people of Gaza will rebel against Hamas. They see where it leads them, they see the terrible devastation, and they will want a different kind of regime. But there are no signs of that yet. So far, Hamas is more popular, and extremism is more popular in Palestine than it was before. The other issue facing us is the diplomatic and political warfare that we'll see in the coming months in the UN, and after the report of that grotesque committee will be published next spring. So the jury is still out. We do not know what are the results of this long, painful, and traumatic campaign. But while we had our trauma, you had yours. Did anyone sitting in this room think some years ago, 5 years ago, 7 years ago, that we will see such a phenomena as beheading? Beheading on YouTube? Innocent American civilians being beheaded by barbaric warriors, and America being quite helpless in dealing with this? But it's not only this morbid, frightening, chilling phenomenon. It's the deep significance of this phenomenon. Because what has happened here? 13 years ago, you were challenged. The wild Middle East arrived in Manhattan and New York, in Manhattan and Washington. So you decided to fight back. The empire decided to strike back. You launched 2 wars. They did not go too well. So you began believing that you can stop the wars, go back home, and forget about it. A kind of fatigue developed in this country. Semi-isolationism. But what do we see now? You went as far as Afghanistan to fight Al-Qaeda, just to find today Al-Qaeda at Israel's doorstep. You tried to bring Jeffersonian democracy to Iraq, just to have ISIS in Iraq. Something went wrong. I'm not into the blame game, and as I'm not American, it's not for me to judge your different administrations, politicians, presidents. But when you look at this period of time, the billions, trillions of dollars that were spent, the lives lost, the energy, and what is the outcome? You tried to fix the Middle East, it didn't work. You tried to live with the Middle East, it didn't work. You tried to run away from the Middle East, it didn't work. There is an impasse there. There's a great, deep challenge. The third trauma is the Jewish one, and I won't elaborate much as we know this story. We now see that there is so much hate for us in the Middle East. But at the same time, there is this more subtle hate for many, by many, not by all, God forbid, for us and definitely for our state in Europe. And this emphasizes only one thing, that what we do have is America. Jewish existence in the 21st century still totally depends on America, on what America gives you and what America gives us. So the need to have a deep, intimate alliance between the Jewish state and the Jewish people in America is only intensified by what we see now. Because the implication of the summer is that the bubbles we all lived in have bursted. The Israeli illusions, the American illusions, they are gone. And in many ways, what we see now is that the sirens have not stopped howling. It's different. Thank God, no rockets falling now. But anyone who is willing to look at history and look at what is really happening has to understand that this time of illusion, this time of quiet that we wanted to believe in, is gone. And we are challenged. Israel is challenged. America is challenged. Jews are challenged. What are the challenges facing Israel as we raise our eyes after this summer? The first challenge is Iran. I know this is not a popular subject with many people in Israel and in this country, mainly my fellow liberals. Many want to think that this is some sort of obsession of Israel's prime ministers and a few other wild hawks. I disagree. If there's something that really makes me angry about the Israeli policy on this issue, is that we created the false image that this is an Israel issue, that specifically this is a Benjamin Netanyahu issue. It is not. Iran and nuclear Iran is a challenge to our civilization. If Iran will go nuclear, the Middle East will go nuclear. The world order will will change. Once Saudi Arabia, some of the Gulf states, later on Egypt, Algeria, Turkey, will go nuclear, and Israel will have to change its very responsible nuclear policy. We will have in the Middle East a multipolar nuclear system, something never tried before. And this is in the world's wildest region. Look at all the chaos around and try to inject nuclear capabilities into it. What do you get? You get a strategic hell, even if Iran does not use its weapons against Tel Aviv. And I don't think they will. The greatest success of the international community in the last 70 years was controlling the nuclear genie. Many people who worked only a few miles north of here, or east of here, were so criticized in the 60s, the 50s for being strangelovers. But actually what they managed to do is to give the world stability in a time when this genie was out. But if Iran would go nuclear, and the Middle East will come that new Middle East, the 21st century will be about nuclear terror and nuclear horror. We will not go back to the old fears of a nuclear Armageddon. That's not the case. But the danger that the next 9/11s will be non-conventional 9/11s will increase dramatically. But the Iranian nuclear program is not only a challenge to our civilization, it's where our civilization has failed. Because again, we all made mistakes. America's energy went into Iraq and Afghanistan rather than to deal with this issue. Israel made its mistakes too. It was so easy to deal with Iran without military action in 2003 and 5 and 7 and 9. It's much more difficult now. Basically, the Iranians have won the technological battle. And if we are not careful, they will win the political battle too. And that might even happen within weeks, definitely within months. That's something for all of us to address. The other challenge facing Israel is the Arab chaos. Some Israelis find this new circumstances convenient because so many of our old enemies are either gone or weaker. There's no Syrian army to invade Israel, to take the Golan Heights. But I am, first of all, so troubled by the human catastrophe surrounding my country. I'm saying it not only as an Israeli, but as a citizen of the Middle East who cares about his neighbors. We were all so naive. Only 3.5 years ago, we really believed the Google kids will rule Egypt. Some of my distinguished colleagues compared the Arab Spring to the American Revolution, the French Revolution. The ones who were very humble compared it to the fall of the Berlin Wall. That's not the case. My heart goes out to my Arab neighbors. This morning in Yale, I had a conversation with some young Arab youngsters. And you wonder, what are the political options they have? A reactionary monarchy, a military dictatorship, an Islamic theocracy, or bloody chaos? There is no hope except for Tunisia, and I pray that their experiment will succeed. The region is engulfed by despair. There's a kind of political Ebola going around. And Israel, with its democratic values, with all its problems, is like a small island in this stormy ocean. The third challenge facing Israel is the one that people talk about most, and rightly so, the Palestinian issue. As you might have heard, I'm a two-state solution person. Throughout my life, my adult life, I opposed occupation, and I always thought settlements are a horrible idea. The first printed text, the first words of mine that went into print were a Peace Now leaflet written in the 1980s, warning how disastrous settlements would be. At that time we said, and I wrote it in that leaflet, that if there will be 100,000 settlers in the West Bank, Israel's future will be in doubt. We have nearly 400,000 settlers there. So I'm strongly against occupation, against settlement, and I'm willing to pay any reasonable price for peace. But I also look at reality as it is. And it is my duty, my moral duty, and intellectual duty, to look at what has happened. In 1993, Israelis opened their heart to peace. We brought in Yasser Arafat. We shook his hand on the White House lawn, and we let him go back to Gaza. America never came to terms with Fidel Castro. We came to terms with someone who was much more radioactive for us than Fidel Castro. 5 months after his arrival in Gaza, the first bus exploded in Dizengoff Street in Tel Aviv. Yet we did not give up. In 2000, Ehud Barak goes to Bill Clinton's peace summit in Camp David. He breaks every Israeli taboo at the time. The Palestinian state dividing Jerusalem 100% of the Gaza Strip, 95% of the West Bank. Bill Clinton, the most capable individual on the face of the planet to bring peace, with a combination of IQ and EQ and passion and compassion. What is the result of that great peace summit? The worst terror offensive a democracy experienced since World War II, with over 1,000 Israelis getting killed, and then as a result of Israel's action, over 3,000 Palestinians getting killed. Yet we did not give up. 2005 comes Ariel Sharon, the extremist, the general, the warmonger. But Ariel Sharon does what the international community and what people like me asked him, demanded of him to do. He pulls out of Gaza. Not one settlement remains, not one checkpoint. Do the Palestinians build a vivid, vibrant, Canadian-like democracy? Hamas takes over and they keep attacking us, sending rockets into Israel every year or two. So we are in a catch. On the one hand, occupation is the silent killer that is killing us. It's killing us demographically, it's killing us morally, and it's killing us politically. And we have to stop it. We have to change the status quo. We have to stop building these settlements that do us no good and do us so much harm. But on the other hand, all the old ways of promoting peace have failed. They did not bring about peace, but turmoil and violence and despair. The fourth challenge facing Israel, and I will spare you the internal challenges facing us. If you'll invite me next year, I'll come and be happy to discuss them. They are fascinating ones. But the external ones, the fourth challenge is our relationship with the West. Those of you who've read my book realize what an admirer I am of the Zionist project, of the deep insight and wisdom and courage and imagination of our founding fathers and mothers. There were two basic principles that made Zionism succeed. One, we always made sure we'll have an alliance with a great Western power. First it was Britain, then it was France, then it's this great alliance with America. But the second principle was as important. We always made sure we'll capture the moral high ground. We survived the violence, terrible violence of the late 1930s because in 1937 we accepted the partition plan. That was impossible in many ways. We won in 1948 because in 1947 we accepted the UN resolution to divide the land. We won the second Intifada because of that Camp David Peace Summit and our willingness to reach out and turn every stone in order to reach peace. The old wisdom of Zionism was based on the understanding that we are not a great empire. We are a small, lonely people that morality is part of its DNA. We are not China, we cannot do Tibet. We are not Russia, we cannot do the Ukraine. Both for ourselves and for others, we always have to capture the moral high ground. We cannot only be about brute force, political force, or military force. We need to be just, and we need to have a universal message. Without that, we lose our soul and we weaken our security. Actually, our national security, not only our morality, depends on that. Sadly, in the last decades, there was erosion regarding these two principles. Too many Israelis in power have forgot how important they are. And we've seen the emergence of Tea Party phenomena in Israel that lost that fundamental understanding that is so crucial to our identity and to our strategic standing. So am I a pessimist with all these challenges and what might seem like gloom and doom? I'm not. I'm a great believer in Israel. I'm a great believer in Israelis. I'm a great believer in Jews. And if I may say so, I'm a great believer in America. Sometimes I have to convince my American friends how great America is. And to remind them that with all of America's faults, there is no other superpower in the world that will do what America did and what America must go on doing. So I believe that although mistakes were made, democracies wake up and see reality, and then when they see it, they're so powerful, much more than all these barbaric forces and tyrannies that confront us. That applies to this country, and that applies to Israel as well. And in this sense, this crisis that we are in is a great opportunity. But the only way to move forward and mobilize and act is to have new ideas. So let me share with you briefly some new ideas. Regarding Gaza, we need to make the distinction between Hamas and the people of Gaza. We cannot ignore 1.8 million Palestinians. We cannot cage them. We have to give them life and hope, while being very firm regarding Hamas. So what is needed is a Marshall Plan for Gaza, to build water plants, to build power stations, to give jobs, housing projects, while not letting Hamas rearm in a serious way that jeopardizes Israel. Beyond that, the horizon for Gaza lies in northern Sinai. If we'll be smart in the relationship with Egypt, we have to find a way to convince the Egyptians to give the people of Gaza some space, at least economic space, if not real sovereignty, in northern Sinai. So they will have breathing space. Because within that very small strip of land, there's no hope for them. ISIS, this is something for you, not for me. But let me give you the advice, the friendly advice of a person coming from the Middle East. The greatest mistake America can make regarding ISIS is to be perceived as being in alliance with Iran and with Assad fighting the Sunnis. The Middle East is a politically incorrect region. It does not read reality in politically correct terms that are so dominant in the Boston area. The way the Middle East will read cooperation between America and the Shiites against ISIS is a Christian American alliance with the Shiites against the Sunni world. This is how it will be perceived, even if it's not the case. You might be able to defeat ISIS, but the result will be 10 either ISISes and Al-Qaedas. The Sunnis are 85% of the Muslim world, most of the Arab world. The Sunnis were America's traditional allies. If they will feel betrayed, if they will feel that America is becoming Iran's air force, the ramifications of that will be dramatic. The only way to fight ISIS is to have moderate Sunnis leading the fight. You will probably need boots on the ground, but they should not be American boots on the ground. They should be Egyptians and Saudis and other moderate Sunnis working in collaboration with America in order to stabilize the Middle East. Regarding Iran, there was and there is only one attitude: very assertive diplomacy. There is no need to consider military options that have serious consequences, but there is need to be realistic. The Iranians will not give up a project that cost them directly and indirectly $150 billion just for some goodwill. There is an opportunity now because of the falling price of oil, which harms them even more than the sanctions. So let the West not blink at this dramatic moment. There's no reason to blink. As long as it's not nuclear, Iran is a paper tiger. But the moment the paper tiger will have nuclear teeth, that will be different. History will not forgive us if we will not take this last moment of opportunity to stop the nuclearization of Iran and of the Middle East. Regarding the Arab chaos and the Palestinian issue, I think what is needed is a new peace concept. We should live behind the peace orthodoxy on the one hand, and on the other hand, we should not accept the status quo and right-wing Israeli policies. Never in history was a theory about reality tested almost in a scientific way, like the final status agreement strategy that kept promising us peace by next spring and kept creating more settlements by next November. It's time to learn from all these failures. In my mind, the new approach should be based on the attempt to bring about a peace that is real but not formal, that is gradual, not immediate. If Israel will freeze settlement activity beyond the blocks immediately, if Israel will then consider retreating from small parts of the West Bank in a cautious, gradual way, but unlike what happened in Gaza, if we will work on understandings with the moderate Palestinians who are there, the Salam Fayyad kind of Palestinians, who want a life, who want a future, if any spot that we retreat from will be a Palestinian city, like Rawabi will be built, if the Saudis and the Gulf countries will finance this new nation-state building in Palestine, if the Egyptians and Jordanians will give it a political context, then you have a reasonable process that does not promise perfect peace now or tomorrow, but creates a really new reality that is developed and designed gradually, but brings some stability and some hope to the region. But new peace is not enough. We also need new Zionism. We need to revitalize our people in a new way. We need an approach that combines morality with realism, that combines peoplehood with universal values. Tikkun Israel v'tikkun olam. My greatest passion these days is your young people. I think that there is nothing more important for the Jewish future than to deal in a new way with young diaspora Jews and especially with young American Jews. I've been around. I've seen your community in all its greatness. I think what you have achieved here is incredible. It should be an example for any other minority in this country or elsewhere. But I also see the challenge that some people do not want to see. There is a terrible generation divide in your community. People 70 and beyond have the Holocaust as their context, and they are religiously committed to Israel and to Jewish life. People over 50 have some memories from their old Jewish neighborhoods, and they remember pre-67 Israel. And they whine and grind, but they cannot help it. They are part of it. People under 30 are in a different world. On the one hand, they probably had a beautiful birthright experience, like the one described. They heard about the Tel Aviv cool thing, and they are impressed by high tech. But on the other hand, they are exposed to attacks on Israel that we did not prepare them for. We did not provide them with the concepts and ideas that will help them deal with all that. By and large, their values are universal values. But Israel and the organized Jewish community seem to them to be more and more tribal. In the last 36 hours, I met 7 different young groups in Yale. A few months before, I did that in Harvard. I did it in other 20, 25 American universities, and I'm about to do it in another 30, 40 next year. Wherever you go, you hear the same story. Too many young American Jews feel there is a tension or contradiction between their liberal values and between Israel. This is the greatest challenge facing us, because there will be no future for your community if we won't change that, and there will not be future for Israel if we don't change it. So what we need is to redefine Zionism and to launch a new kind of liberal, energetic Zionism that will be relevant for them. We have to give the young soldiers and the young Israelis a sense of meaning, a feeling that Israel is a just state with social justice that gives them work and housing and decent life. And we have to give your youngsters a feeling that Israel is inspiring, that they can be proud of it, not embarrassed by it. This is as important as Iran and the Arab world and all the other challenges. If we do not win the battle for our own souls, for our own young, we are endangering ourselves. As I said, I'm an optimist. The 20th century was our most dramatic century. We came from hell. The beginning of that century, we lost every third Jew. But in the second half of the 20th century, we built Jewish sovereignty there, and you built the perfect diaspora here. The perfect diaspora. Nothing like it. We should all see these two great historical miracles. I'm not a mystic person, but these are miracles, man-made miracles. We should know to appreciate what we achieved, to be grateful for what we have, and we should also learn to do something new, to love ourselves. With all the criticism and the internal divides, what we've done in recent history is astonishing. And yet we have to see that both miracles are challenged. I ask in my book, why Israel? What's Israel? And will Israel? Why Israel? Because there is a need. There is a moral imperative to have a home for the homeless people. And what's Israel? Vitality against all odds. And will Israel? And will this great American Jewish community? That depends on us. Thank you very much.